On my birthday, I mailed my daughter a letter filled with love. Weeks later, it came back, unopened, stamped return to sender. Not even my grandson's name written inside. I didn't cry. I simply placed it in a drawer. One day, when she least expects it, the truth will reach him. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Linda had been counting the days without saying so aloud. Her grandson Ethan's birthday was drawing near, and every year until now she had been part of it. The thought of balloons bobbing against the ceiling, the chatter of children chasing one another, and the sound of Ethan's delighted laughter filled her with warmth. She could still picture the way his small arms flung around her neck when she arrived with a gift wrapped in bright paper, the way he grinned as if her presence alone made the day more complete. Those memories were stitched into her heart, reminders that she belonged in those moments. This year, however, something felt off. The calendar in the kitchen showed the date creeping closer, yet her phone remained stubbornly silent. Each vibration sent her pulse racing, only to leave her disappointed when it turned out to be junk mail or some impersonal update from a store she'd never visited. She kept telling herself Emily would call, that her daughter was just caught up in the chaos of planning. But as the silence stretched, doubt began to seep in. The message came one evening, sudden and cruel in its brevity. Linda's phone lit up on the table, and relief washed over her as she reached for it. Finally, she thought, here it is. But the moment her eyes scanned the words, the relief collapsed into disbelief. Only close family. Don't come. Her hands shook as the phone nearly slipped from her grasp. She blinked hard, hoping she had misread it, but the words remained. 14 letters arranged in a way that felt like a knife pressed to her chest. No warmth, no kindness, no hint of explanation. Just rejection. A sentence so sharp it seemed to slice through the years of devotion that had come before. Linda read it again and again until the letters blurred. Only close family. Don't come. Emily had written it, her daughter, the child she had raised with sleepless nights, sacrificed paychecks, and unwavering love. The girl she once held while whispering promises of forever. And now, with a few cold words, Emily was erasing her from the circle of belonging. Her chest tightened until breathing felt like a chore. She lowered the phone slowly as though any sudden movement might break her apart completely. The silence in the room grew heavier, pressing against her ears. The refrigerator hummed in the corner. The clock ticked on the wall, but all Linda could hear were the words replaying in her mind, echoing with a cruelty she couldn't outrun. She thought of Ethan, her sweet boy with his wide smile and endless questions. Would he ask about her? Would he wonder where his grandmother was on the day the candles were lit and the wishes were made? Or would the cocktail of the party bury her absence, leaving her forgotten in the laughter of others? The image of Ethan blowing out candles without her there felt like a weight dragging her into the ground. Memories came unbidden, rushing through her like water breaking a dam. Emily at 5 years old, cheeks puffed as she leaned forward to blow out her own candles, while Linda clapped the loudest. Emily's teenage years, when Linda stretched every dollar to buy the dress her daughter had begged for. The nights she stayed awake, mending tears in costumes, helping with homework, praying for Emily's future. Those sacrifices had been more than duties. They had been gifts of love. And now it seemed as if none of it mattered. The rejection wasn't silence. It wasn't distance. It was deliberate. A line drawn in sand, cutting her out of the circle she had once been at the center of. Linda searched her memory for the moment when things had gone wrong. Had she pushed too hard? Had she spoken words she couldn't take back? Had her love somehow turned into a burden Emily wanted to escape? No answer came, only the chilling reality of the message on her phone. The house felt emptier than ever. The walls seemed to close in, reflecting her loneliness back at her. She set the phone down, but its glow still lingered in her mind, like a scar she couldn't hide. She wanted to cry, but the tears refused to fall, trapped somewhere deep inside where the ache had settled. In a few days, her family would gather without her. They would sing happy birthday, slice cake, and capture photographs where her place should have been. There would be laughter, smiles, and the warmth of togetherness, and Linda would not be in any of it. For the first time since Ethan's birth, she would be erased from his celebration, absent from a chapter of his life she had helped begin. The night stretched long. She sat with her hands folded, staring at the quiet around her, feeling the slow, relentless throb of a wound she hadn't expected. She had always believed family was unbreakable, that love, even tested, would hold. But as she stared into the darkness, Linda realized she had been left outside the circle, and the ache of that exclusion cut deeper than words could ever say. The night after receiving Emily's message, Linda lay awake staring at the ceiling, the glow of the moon casting pale shadows across her bedroom walls. Sleep refused to come. Each time she closed her eyes, the words returned, heavy and merciless, etched into her mind. Only close family, don't come. They throbbed like an open wound, reminding her with every breath that she had been cast aside, stripped of the title she had held so proudly, grandmother, mother, family. Her body felt weighted, as though her heart had grown too heavy for her chest. She rolled onto her side, pulling the blanket tight, but warmth couldn't reach her. What lingered instead was the sting of betrayal, the kind only a child could inflict upon a parent. She had prepared herself for many things in life: loss, loneliness, even the aching years of old age. But never for this. Never for her daughter deciding she no longer belonged. The house was painfully quiet. On nights like this, silence was not peace, but punishment. Each tick of the clock reminded her of the time she was losing, time she would never recover, moments she should have shared with Ethan. She imagined him waking the next morning, chattering about his party, about balloons and cake, and the little gifts he hoped to unwrap. He wouldn't know that his grandmother was at home, clutching her phone as though it held the answer she longed for. Linda pressed the device against her chest, her heart beating hard beneath it. She wanted to call Emily, to demand an explanation, but fear held her back. Fear of hearing her daughter confirm, in her own voice, what the message had already declared. Fear of widening the rift until it became a canyon impossible to bridge. Her pride and her longing were at war, neither strong enough to win. Memories of Emily's childhood swam to the surface, sharp and vivid. Linda remembered standing in long grocery lines with a little girl tugging on her sleeve, begging for candy she couldn't afford. She remembered scraping together enough change to buy birthday cakes that weren't nearly as grand as the ones Ethan had now, but they had always been made with love. She remembered nights spent sewing costumes for school plays, her tired fingers pricked with needles, just so Emily would shine in front of her classmates. Every sacrifice had been a promise, unspoken, but real. I will always show up for you. Now Emily had taken that promise and returned it with silence. Linda's love hadn't been canceled by years or distance, yet in a few cruel words, her presence had been dismissed as unnecessary, unwanted. She tried to understand why. Had she held on too tightly? Spoken too harshly during their last disagreement? Had her advice, meant to guide, been taken as judgment? She searched her memory for answers, but all she found was a hollow ache where certainty used to be. The days leading up to Ethan's party were slow and merciless. Linda avoided calls from friends, afraid they might ask about the celebration. What could she say? That her daughter no longer counted her as close family? That her place at the table had been erased? The shame of it tightened her throat. She found herself rehearsing excuses, lies she could tell to cover the truth. But each attempt crumbled under the weight of her grief. One afternoon, she wandered into the kitchen and found herself opening the cupboard where she kept her baking supplies. Without meaning to, she pulled out the flour, the sugar, the cocoa powder. Her hands moved on their own, mixing ingredients as tears blurred her vision. She baked a small chocolate cake, the kind Ethan loved most, decorating it with careful swirls of frosting. The smell filled the house, warm and sweet, a cruel reminder of what she was missing. When the cake was finished, she stared at it for a long time, her chest tightening. It should have been placed on a table surrounded by laughter and candles, Ethan's little hands clapping in delight. Instead, it sat on her counter, untouched, a symbol of love with no place to go. She slid it into the refrigerator, whispering to herself that perhaps she would bring it to him later, though she knew in her heart she wouldn't. That night, Linda sat at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed. The glow of the refrigerator cast a faint halo around the cake inside, like a secret meant never to be shared. She rested her chin on her folded hands, staring into the shadows, feeling the silence press down on her again. The wound wasn't visible, but it was there, bleeding inside her pierced chest with every breath she took. It wasn't just the party she was losing, it was belonging itself. The quiet told her more than words ever could. Her daughter had decided she wasn't part of the circle anymore, and the silence that followed was heavier than any scream, sharper than any rejection. It was the wound of a mother left outside her own family's door. The chair was empty. Linda could see it in her mind as vividly as if she were standing in the middle of the celebration itself. A wooden chair at the end of a table, waiting for her, surrounded by streamers and balloons, but left untouched. She imagined the noise of children shrieking in delight, the camera flashes capturing Ethan's joy, the smell of birthday cake filling the air. And through it all, her place remained vacant, the silence of her absence louder than the laughter that would cover it. The morning of the party arrived with cruel brightness. Sunlight poured through her curtains, but to Linda it felt harsh, almost mocking. Somewhere across town, her family was gathering. She pictured Emily bustling around the kitchen, Michael carrying trays of food, Ethan running through the living room with boundless energy. She imagined the sound of wrapping paper tearing, the chorus of voices singing happy birthday. In every image, she searched for herself and found nothing. She was outside the frame, locked out of the memory before it had even been made. She tried to distract herself, pacing the living room, straightening the couch pillows, wiping a counter that was already clean. But her mind refused to let go. It carried her back to last year, when she had stood in the middle of Emily's decorated home, watching Ethan beam as he leaned over his cake. "Grandma, come sit next to me," he had shouted, his little hand tugging hers until she sat at his side. She could still feel the warmth of his small fingers, sticky with frosting, pressing against her palm. That memory, so full of life, now felt like salt rubbed into the wound of her exclusion. Time moved slowly that day. She heard cars outside, doors slamming, laughter drifting faintly from neighbors' yards. Her phone stayed quiet. No call from Ethan, no photo sent to include her, no acknowledgement of the bond she thought unbreakable. The silence was brutal, a deliberate reminder that she was no longer considered part of the celebration. Linda walked to the window and gazed at the street below. Children rode bicycles, chasing one another with carefree joy, their laughter rising into the air. She wondered if Ethan was laughing at that very moment, if his face was glowing in the candlelight while voices cheered around him. Her chest ached with the thought that someone else was helping him blow out the candles. Someone else was taking her place at his side. The idea of it hollowed her, leaving her with nothing but echoes. As afternoon turned into evening, Linda's house grew darker, shadows stretching across the floor. The refrigerator still held the small chocolate cake she had baked. She opened the door just to look at it, her breath fogging the chilled air, her heart tightening at the sight. She imagined walking through Emily's front door, carrying that cake, presenting it to Ethan. She imagined his face lighting up, but those images dissolved, cruel illusions that belonged only to her imagination. She closed the door, the sound sharp in the stillness of her kitchen. The loneliness of that day carved into her deeper than any wound before. It wasn't just missing a party, it was being erased from a story she had helped begin. She had been there at Ethan's first breath, holding Emily's trembling hand in the hospital, whispering promises to protect and love. Now she was being told she no longer had a place at his milestones. The pain was sharp, but beneath it was something worse. The fear that this was not temporary, that her absence would become a pattern, that she was watching the slow unraveling of her role in his life. As the evening wore on, Linda sat in her armchair, staring into the silence. The image of that empty chair haunted her, a symbol of all she had lost in a single day. She pressed her palm against her heart, trying to steady the rhythm of her breaths, whispering Ethan's name as though speaking it aloud could bridge the distance. But nothing came back, just the quiet hum of a house that no longer felt like home. Her story was no longer hers alone. It was now a tale of what it means to be shut out by the ones you love most, to have your place erased by the very family you built. The wound was fresh, but the silence told her it was only the beginning. If you've ever felt the sting of being left behind, if you've ever seen your place taken away while the world carried on without you, stay with me. This story is far from over, and the truth behind Emily's choice has yet to be revealed. Like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. The day after Ethan's birthday, Linda woke to a house that felt heavier than before. The sunlight creeping through her curtains seemed duller, muted by the ache that had settled inside her. She lay still, listening to the emptiness around her, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of wood settling in the walls. The silence wasn't peace, it was punishment, a reminder that a celebration had passed without her, that laughter had rung out across town while she sat alone with her sorrow. She rose slowly, her body stiff, as though grief itself had taken hold of her bones. In the kitchen, the small chocolate cake waited behind the glass of the refrigerator door. She stood before it, her reflection faint against the surface, staring at the swirls of frosting she had crafted with such care. It was more than a dessert. It was love given shape, a gift meant for her grandson's hands. Now it was nothing but a relic of what might have been. She closed the door softly, unwilling to throw it away, yet unable to touch it. The silence of her phone was louder than any words. No photos of Ethan's smile, no message from Emily, no trace that she had been thought of at all. She carried her phone from room to room like an anchor, setting it on the table as if keeping it close might change something. But the screen remained dark. She tapped it awake sometimes just to stare at the emptiness, her chest tightening with the truth it displayed. There was nothing waiting for her. When a friend called that afternoon, her heart leapt, only to falter when the cheerful voice asked how the party had gone. Linda's breath caught, her throat tightening as she forced a small laugh, skirting the question with vague answers. "Oh, it was nice," she murmured, though her heart knew the weight of the lie. Hanging up, she pressed the phone against her chest, ashamed of the deception, but unable to admit the truth. The humiliation of being unwanted was too raw, too sharp to share. As evening drew near, Linda drifted into her living room and lowered herself onto the couch. The cushions seemed too large, swallowing her in their emptiness. She glanced toward the corner where toys once sat when Ethan visited, bright blocks and little cars scattered across the rug. Now the space was clean, neat, and painfully bare. She closed her eyes and the silence pressed harder, filling every space where laughter should have been. She thought of Emily, her daughter, moving through the party with practiced ease, offering smiles, arranging plates of food, guiding Ethan through the rhythm of celebration. The image twisted inside her. Was Emily relieved not to see her there? Did her absence make the house lighter, the air freer? The thought gnawed at her, each possibility cutting deeper than the last. She had been called too controlling before, too insistent, her love mistaken for judgment. Perhaps Emily had decided that banishing her was easier than facing her. Still, the cruelty of it was unbearable. That night, Linda lit a single candle at her kitchen table. She set it before her and imagined Ethan leaning forward, cheeks puffed, eyes glowing as he blew out his birthday flames. She whispered into the quiet, "Happy birthday, sweetheart," and let the candle burn low. The wax pooled and hardened, a silent testament to the celebration she hadn't been allowed to join. When she finally extinguished it, the darkness returned with finality, wrapping around her like a shroud. Sleep was restless. She dreamed of voices just beyond her reach, of Ethan laughing while she stood outside a window, pressing her palms against the glass. She called his name, but no one turned. She woke with tears dampening her pillow, her chest aching from the remnants of the dream. The wound inside her deepened, layered with fear that this wasn't a one-time exclusion, but the beginning of something permanent. The days that followed were quieter still. Linda moved through them like a ghost in her own home, carrying the weight of silence wherever she went. She opened her curtains each morning, hoping the sun might ease her heaviness. But its light only revealed the truth more clearly. She was alone, uninvited, unacknowledged. Her love had no place to land, no space where it was welcome. The weight pressed on her shoulders with every step, but it was in her chest where it hurt most. The heaviness of a mother's love turned away. And in that silence, in that cruel absence, she felt the sharp edge of something she feared would not be mended. Linda stood at the window, watching the neighborhood children play in the fading light. Their laughter carried on the breeze, shrill and unburdened, cutting into her chest like shards of glass. She thought of Ethan at their age, running through her backyard with boundless energy, his sneakers kicking up patches of dirt as he darted between the garden beds. She remembered the way he would look back at her, eyes wide and sparkling, asking her to chase him. She had always chased him, even when her knees protested, even when her body begged her to stop. She would chase him forever if it meant keeping his laughter close. Now the sound of other children only deepened her loneliness. She pressed her hand to the cool glass, as if reaching for something that was no longer hers to hold. The house behind her seemed too quiet, too heavy with the weight of absence. She had built her life around family, pouring herself into raising Emily, then pouring what remained of her heart into Ethan. To be cut off now felt like punishment for sins she didn't fully understand. Her mind drifted back to Emily's teenage years, the battles that had marked their home like invisible scars. Linda had been strict, perhaps too strict, clinging to rules and boundaries she believed would protect her daughter. She remembered slammed doors, heated words, long nights of silence when neither of them would bend. Still, she thought love had survived those storms. She thought time had softened the edges of those years. But perhaps Emily had not forgotten. Perhaps the old wounds lingered, buried under years of civility, waiting for their chance to rise again. She sat at the dining table, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood. So many meals had been shared there, so many birthdays celebrated with balloons and laughter. She could almost see Ethan climbing into his chair, frosting smeared across his cheeks, giggling when she scolded him gently for licking the knife. The memory ached inside her, sweet and cruel all at once. She had been there for every birthday until now. To be excluded from this one made all the others feel fragile, as though they too could be erased. Regret crept in, silent but relentless. She thought of moments when she might have been too critical with Emily, times when she offered advice that sounded more like judgment. She remembered phone calls where she pushed too hard, visits where her eagerness might have smothered rather than supported. She had meant only to help, to guide, to show love in the ways she knew best. But what if Emily had seen it differently? What if her intentions had been twisted in her daughter's heart into something oppressive, something unwelcome? The weight of those questions pressed harder than any silence. She wanted to pick up the phone, to hear Emily's voice, to beg for clarity, yet fear held her still. What if the rejection was spoken aloud, undeniable? What if her daughter told her plainly that she was no longer wanted in their lives? The thought was unbearable. It was easier to sit in uncertainty than to risk a truth that might shatter her completely. Linda rose and wandered into Ethan's old playroom. The shelves still held picture books and stuffed animals, relics of afternoons when she read to him until he fell asleep against her shoulder. She picked up a small toy car, its paint chipped from use, and held it in her palm. She could almost hear the hum of Ethan's voice, the way he mimicked engine sounds while pushing it across the floor. She closed her eyes and let the memory wash over her, bittersweet and fleeting. When she opened them, the room was silent again. The toy nothing more than a reminder of what had been lost. She sank into the rocking chair in the corner, the one where she had cradled Ethan as a baby. The chair creaked under her, the rhythm familiar, almost comforting. She remembered the smell of his skin, the warmth of his tiny body nestled against her chest. Those were the moments that had given her life meaning, the moments that made every sacrifice worthwhile. To think that such memories could end, that new ones might no longer include her, filled her with a despair too deep to name. As night fell, Linda turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the echo of her regrets. She wondered if there had been a single moment when she could have chosen differently, a moment when a softer word, a gentler hand, might have changed the course of her relationship with Emily. The questions gnawed at her, unanswerable and merciless. She longed for forgiveness, though she wasn't even sure what crime she had committed. Sleep came late and restless again, dreams laced with images of doors closing, voices fading, laughter that belonged to others. She woke in the early hours with her chest tight, her pillow damp with tears. The silence of the house stretched around her like an ocean, vast and unending. She lay there, staring into the darkness, wondering if she would ever find her way back to the family she loved more than life itself. The morning of Ethan's birthday arrived like a weight pressing down on Linda's chest. She woke before dawn, restless and hollow, her mind already circling the thought that today, somewhere in the same town, her grandson would blow out candles without her there to watch. The ache of exclusion was sharper than any physical pain she had ever known. It was a wound carved by silence and absence, one she could not bandage or heal with time. She dressed slowly, her hands trembling as she buttoned her blouse, as though the simple act of preparing for the day might give her some control over the chaos unraveling inside her. She set the table for one, poured herself coffee, and sat staring at the steam rising from the cup. The quiet of the house was unbearable, every tick of the clock a reminder that she was no longer part of the rhythm of her family's life. As the hours crept closer to the celebration she wasn't invited to, Linda's restraint began to fray. She imagined Emily's backyard decorated with balloons, Ethan running around with his friends, the sound of laughter spilling into the air. She could almost smell the frosting on the cake, hear the cheers as Ethan made his wish. Her chest tightened at the thought that her daughter would stand nearby, smiling, as though nothing were missing. The longer she thought about it, the more something inside her snapped. She could not sit quietly while her grandson celebrated without her. She could not let the day pass pretending it didn't matter. Rising with sudden resolve, she grabbed her keys from the counter. If Emily wanted to keep her away, she would have to say it to her face. The drive across town blurred past in fragments. Red lights, crosswalks, the hum of the engine beneath her trembling hands. Her pulse thudded in her ears, her throat dry. By the time she turned onto Emily's street, her heart was pounding so fiercely she could barely breathe. The houses looked too cheerful, too alive, each lawn trimmed, each porch decorated as though mocking the storm raging inside her. And then she saw it, Emily's driveway lined with cars, the sound of voices spilling from the backyard. Balloons swayed in the breeze, bright and careless. Linda pulled over, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. For a moment, she simply sat there, her chest rising and falling in uneven bursts. She imagined walking through the gate, imagined Ethan's face lighting up when he saw her. But she also imagined Emily's expression. Cold, unyielding, a wall she could not break through. Her hand hovered over the car door handle, her entire body caught between longing and dread. She could already hear the confrontation, the sharp words, the shame of being told to leave in front of strangers. She wasn't sure her heart could survive that final blow. Still, she couldn't drive away. Not yet. She lowered the window and listened. Children's laughter drifted toward her, carried on the breeze. She could pick out Ethan's voice, higher and brighter than the rest, and the sound struck her like lightning. Tears burned her eyes as she gripped the steering wheel tighter. He was so close, just beyond the fence, and yet she was worlds away. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Guests walked past her car, arms carrying gifts wrapped in colorful paper. None of them noticed her sitting there, small and invisible. She shrank back into the seat, shame curling through her, but still she did not leave. She could not leave. Finally, she saw Emily. Her daughter's figure appeared near the back door, guiding people in and out with practiced ease. Even from a distance, Linda could see the calm in her posture, the smile she offered to the guests. It was the same smile Linda had once been proud of, a smile she had nurtured in her daughter since childhood. Now it felt like a weapon, a reminder that Emily could create a world without her and never falter. Linda's breath came ragged. She wanted to scream, to call out, to demand an explanation for this cruel exile, but no words left her throat. Instead, she sat frozen, her heart breaking in silence. She stayed there for over an hour, the car engine off, her body stiff in the stillness. She watched shadows move across the windows of the house, caught glimpses of balloons bobbing above the fence, listened to the waves of laughter and cheers rise and fall. And when the faint sound of happy birthday reached her ears, she broke completely. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling sobs that shook her body. She could see it in her mind. Ethan leaning over the cake, the glow of candles on his face, the wish he whispered before blowing them out. She should have been there, clapping, smiling, part of his memory. Instead, she was a ghost in the street, unseen, unwanted. When the song ended and the cheer faded, Linda knew she couldn't stay any longer. Her presence outside the house felt pathetic, almost shameful. She started the car, her hands trembling, and pulled away slowly. In the rearview mirror, balloons still swayed above the fence, shrinking into the distance until they disappeared completely. Driving home, she felt as if something inside her had finally snapped beyond repair. The breaking point had come not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with silence. The silence of a mother erased, a grandmother replaced, a woman left behind. The night after Ethan's birthday, Linda's house felt emptier than ever. She moved through the rooms like a shadow, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The celebration had ended miles away, but the echoes of laughter still clung to her like a cruel haunting. She had seen it all from her car, the balloons, the guests, the glow of candles she was never meant to witness. The memory gnawed at her until she thought she might unravel completely. She poured herself a glass of wine but couldn't bring herself to drink it. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pale light of the lamp, her body rigid with a mix of grief and fury. Words pressed against her throat, words that had burned there for weeks, desperate for release. If Emily refused to hear her voice, then she would put it in writing. She pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer, the crisp whiteness almost mocking. For a long time the pen hovered above the page, her hand trembling, her mind clouded with too many emotions at once. Anger wanted to lead, grief threatened to drown her, and longing pulled her in the opposite direction. Finally, she pressed the pen down, the ink spilling her pain onto the page. "Emily," she wrote, the letter sharp, as if carved into the paper. "I don't know how we arrived at this place, but I can no longer carry this silence. You have cut me out of your life, and now out of Ethan's. Do you realize what you are doing? Do you understand the cruelty of what it means for a child to grow up without his grandmother, not because I am gone, but because you have decided I should not exist in his world?" Her hand shook, but she continued, faster now, her feelings tumbling into sentences without restraint. "I have made mistakes, I know that. I wasn't a perfect mother to you, and I never pretended to be. But I loved you, Emily. I love you still, even now when you treat me like a stranger. And I love Ethan more than words can ever say. You may think you are protecting him, but all you are doing is teaching him that love can be erased, that family can be discarded." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't stop. Each line felt like both a wound and a release. "Do you remember your 10th birthday? I stayed up all night baking that cake shaped like a castle, even though I didn't know if I could pull it off. Your eyes lit up when you saw it, and in that moment I thought I had given you something to remember forever." Now, when Ethan's eyes lit up at his cake, I wasn't there to see it. I wasn't there to be part of his forever, and that was by your choice. She pressed the pen harder, the ink smudging beneath her tears. "You may think I am difficult. Maybe I am, but difficult doesn't mean disposable. I am still your mother and Ethan's grandmother. I am still flesh and blood, even if you wish I weren't. You cannot rewrite history to erase me, and you cannot keep him from wondering one day where I was, why I never came. What will you say then? That I didn't care? That I didn't want to be there? That is a lie, Emily. You know it." She paused, her chest heaving, her breath uneven. For a moment, she thought about softening her words, about rewriting them into something calmer, gentler. But the rage inside her refused. Too much had been swallowed, too much left unsaid. She needed Emily to feel the weight of what she had done, so she wrote the truth in its sharpest form. "I sat outside your house today, in my car. I heard his laughter. I heard the song. I saw the balloons. I saw everything, except my grandson's face. I was close enough to touch that world. But you built a wall and kept me out. Do you know what that feels like, Emily? It feels like death. It feels like I am being buried alive, cut off from the people I love most. And I cannot forgive you for that." Her pen slowed, exhaustion flooding her body. The anger had burned through her, leaving a hollow ache behind. She looked at the page, the words raw and jagged, and wondered if they would ever reach her daughter's heart. Or would Emily tear the letter open, read the first few lines, and throw it away without a second thought? Still, she kept writing, the final lines softer, though no less desperate. "I don't know what you want from me anymore. If it is distance, I will give it. If it is silence, you already have it. But understand this, I will always love Ethan. No wall you build can change that. And one day when he is old enough to ask, I will tell him the truth. I will tell him I was here, that I never stopped trying, that I loved him, even from the shadows." She set the pen down, her hand aching, her eyes swollen from crying. The letter lay before her, a reflection of her heartbreak and fury, a confession carved in ink. Folding it carefully, she slid it into an envelope and wrote her daughter's name across the front. The act gave her no peace, but it gave her something else. Proof that she had spoken her truth, even if Emily chose not to hear it. Linda placed the letter by the door, ready to be mailed the next morning. Then she turned off the kitchen light and climbed the stairs, her body heavy with grief, her mind swirling with the echo of her own words. The house was silent, but her letter carried the storm she could no longer hold inside. The morning light crept through the curtains, soft but unwelcoming. Linda sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the envelope she had placed there the night before. Its presence felt heavier than stone. She had written her truth, carved her pain into words, but now came the harder choice, whether to send it. Once mailed, there would be no taking it back. Her coffee sat untouched, steam fading into nothing. She picked up the envelope, turned it over in her hands, then set it down. Over and over the motion repeated, as if she were weighing not just paper, but years of fractured history. The letter held every wound, every accusation, every shard of longing she had buried. Would it bring her daughter closer, or drive her further away forever? At last, she slipped it into her bag, her decision still uncertain. She would carry it with her until she knew what to do. The day dragged on in silence. She tried reading, tried distracting herself with housework, but every thought circled back to Emily and Ethan. When the phone rang in the afternoon, her heart leapt before she even checked the screen. But it wasn't Emily, just a telemarketer, reminding her how empty her days had become. By evening, loneliness pressed against her chest like a physical weight. She poured another glass of wine, then set it aside untouched, the way she had the night before. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the street where children rode their bikes, their laughter echoing faintly in the fading light. For a moment, she let herself imagine Ethan among them, his small hands gripping the handlebars, his voice rising above the others as he called for his mother. The ache in her heart deepened. She turned away, unable to hold the image without breaking. Later that night, restless and unable to sleep, Linda opened her bag and pulled the letter out again. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes tracing the lines she had written in a storm of fury and grief. The words still burned, but in the quiet of the night, they sounded harsher than she remembered. Was this the message she wanted Emily to read? Would her daughter hear the love buried beneath the anger, or only the accusations? She pressed her palms to her face, her breath uneven. Part of her wanted to tear the letter apart, to burn it in the fireplace and let the ashes scatter into nothing. Another part clung to it fiercely, convinced it was her only chance to break the silence that had swallowed them whole. The next morning, after a sleepless night, she walked to the mailbox with the envelope in her hand. Her fingers hovered at the slot. One small motion, and the letter would be goodbye, carried into her daughter's world. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Finally, with a sharp inhale, she slid it in and let it drop. The sound was final, like a door closing. For the rest of the day, Linda moved through the house in a daze. Every noise made her flinch. Every vibration of her phone set her heart racing. She waited for a call, for a message, for something, anything. But the hours passed and nothing came. That night, she sat by the window, staring at the dark street outside. Doubt gnawed at her. Had she done the right thing? Or had she just pushed her daughter further away? On the third day, as she watered the plants by the porch, she saw the mail carrier walking up the street. Her pulse quickened. When he stopped at her house and placed a single envelope into her box, her hands trembled as she went to retrieve it. It was her own letter, returned. Her name and address were scrawled across the front in her own handwriting, but Emily had written 2 words in black ink across the sealed flap: "Return to sender." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She gripped the edge of the mailbox, her body trembling. For a long moment, she stood frozen, the envelope cutting into her palm. Back inside, she sat at the kitchen table and stared at the letter. She couldn't bring herself to open it, to look again at the words she had poured her soul into. Instead, she laid it down in front of her, as though it were a gravestone marking the death of something precious. The rejection was more brutal than silence. It wasn't just absence. It was refusal. Emily hadn't simply ignored her. She had sent her voice back, unopened, unwanted. Tears came slowly at first, then in a torrent. Linda pressed her face into her hands and let the sobs shake through her body. The letter lay between her elbows, untouched, its folded paper carrying both her love and her fury, sealed forever from the eyes it was meant for. As night fell, the house closed in around her with its unbearable stillness. She lit a single lamp and sat beside it, staring into the glow. The shadows stretched across the walls, long and lonely, echoing her own emptiness. Yet even through the grief, one truth clung stubbornly inside of her. Her love for Ethan remained. Nothing Emily did could erase that. One day she believed he would seek her out, ask about the grandmother he never knew. And when that day came, she would tell him everything. That she had been here, that she had tried, that she had loved him with a devotion stronger than rejection. Until then, she would endure. She would carry the weight of a love returned unopened, like the letter on the table before her. Silent, aching, but still alive. The days that followed blurred into one another, each carrying the same suffocating silence. The returned letter remained on the kitchen table, a mute witness to everything Linda had lost. She didn't move it, didn't open it, only left it there, as though removing it would erase the proof of Emily's rejection. Every morning she woke with the faint hope that something might change, that her phone might light up with a message, or the mailbox might hold a different letter, one that wasn't hers, returned unopened. But each day ended the same way, with nothing but quiet and shadows stretching long across the walls. She tried to distract herself with routine, watering the plants, dusting the shelves, folding laundry that hardly needed folding. But each act felt hollow. At night, she poured herself a glass of wine, lifted it halfway, then set it down untouched. Her grief no longer erupted into sobs. It seeped into her like a slow poison, settling into her bones. Sometimes she spoke aloud, as though Emily and Ethan could hear her across the miles. "I love you," she whispered into the empty room, her voice trembling. I never stopped. Other times she sat in silence, her lips pressed tightly together, as though sealing the words inside herself where no one could reject them again. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the town, rattling the windows and painting the sky in bruised grays. Linda lit a candle and sat at the table, staring at the flicker of flame. The returned envelope lay inches from her hand. She reached for it, then pulled back. Hours passed with the storm pounding against the house, yet still she did not move it. When the thunder finally quieted, she rose and walked to the fireplace. With careful hands, she picked up the letter. The paper felt heavier than she remembered, swollen with all the pain she had poured into it. She held it above the fire, waiting for her resolve to harden. The flames crackled hungrily, eager to consume, but she couldn't let go. At the last moment, she pulled it back to her chest, clutching it tightly as tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't burn it. She couldn't. Destroying it would feel like destroying her last fragile thread to Emily. Instead, she tucked it inside a drawer, hidden but safe. Weeks passed. The seasons began to shift, summer giving way to the first bite of autumn. Neighbors decorated their porches with pumpkins and wreaths, their laughter and music floating down the street. Linda watched from her window, a ghost among the living. She wanted to step outside, to join the rhythm of ordinary life, but something held her back. Her world had shrunk to the walls of her home, to the quiet ache in her chest, to the hidden letter in the drawer. Then one morning, while sipping her untouched coffee, she caught sight of a boy on the sidewalk, no more than 6 or 7, riding his bike in a burst of laughter. Something about the tilt of his head, the energy in his movement, struck her with piercing familiarity. For a fleeting moment, she imagined it was Ethan, as if her grandson had somehow found his way to her street, drawn by a bond that could not be broken. Her heart surged, aching with a hope she knew was foolish. When the boy's mother called him back inside, Linda's vision blurred with tears. But the image stayed with her long after they disappeared, a reminder that love could exist beyond rejection, beyond silence, beyond absence. That night, she sat at the table once more. The drawer where the letter lay seemed to call to her. She opened it, lifted the envelope, and ran her fingers over Emily's handwriting. Return to sender. Instead of breaking her, the words now felt like a challenge. Her daughter had shut her out, but Linda's love would not vanish. It lived stubbornly, refusing to be silenced. She placed the letter back into the drawer, not as a grave marker this time, but as a vow. She would wait for Ethan, for the day he might seek her out, curious about the grandmother he had been denied. And when that day came, she would be ready, with stories, with photographs, with the truth of her love preserved in every detail. The house was quiet, but inside her chest, something steadied. The loneliness would remain, yes, and the ache would never truly fade. But love had given her strength to endure, Even unreturned, even rejected, it had not been canceled. Linda leaned back in her chair, the glow of the lamp warming her face. She breathed deeply, the first calm breath she had felt in weeks, and closed her eyes. Somewhere out there, her grandson was growing. Somewhere the thread of love still connected them, invisible but unbreakable. And she would hold on.